on earth is going on with The Hobbit? Warner Brothers representatives arrived this week and the Prime Minister's offered to meet them in the hope of keeping the films here, to be made here. The government's even offered to change the employment laws. The film industry in New Zealand is worth $2.8 billion, and a film like The Hobbit employs a minimum of 2,500 people. So Peter Jackson is blaming the unions. He says the international ban put on the movie forced Warners to have a look offshore. The unions say all this fuss could have been avoided if only Sir Peter had sat down with them in the first place. Now, we were hoping to speak to Simon Whipp from the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, but he said New Zealand actors can speak for themselves, and he scurried back to Australia. The Screen Actors Guild in America would not talk to us. We also wanted to speak to Warners. They said nobody would speak on camera, and they even refused to answer some questions from us. But we are joined by two folk at the heart of negotiations. Helen Kelly is president of the Combined Trade Unions, and John Barnett is the managing director of South Pacific Pictures, very experienced film man, of course one of the most experienced film people in this country. So, Helen Kelly, we'll start with you first of all. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what we've got is the actors now in full retreat. What we've seen after last week with your handling of things is a complete failure for the union movement. That's so, isn't it?
Well, no, actually, Paul, this dispute wasn't settled last week. It was settled the week before with encouragement from Peter Jackson, who sent several emails to me saying, I'm encouraging Sparta to meet and to talk through all the issues and find a resolution. That's what I did. I stepped into this dispute only at the end of September to help the parties find a way through. We've found a way through. It's completely
I think you
settled.
might be, with the greatest respect, Ms Kelly, I think you might be fantasising. The general public impression is that the union is in full retreat. They're leaning over backwards now to make no more trouble, to assure the Warner Brothers there'll be no more union trouble. It's a complete...
Well, no, what we're saying actually... No, Paul, what we're saying, and don't believe everything you hear in the media as a piece of advice I'd give you. What we're saying is that we have found a way through that will provide security for the film industry into the future, quite a mature way through. And as I say, encouraged by Peter Jackson...
What's the agreement? I'm sorry. What is the agreement?
Okay, well, yeah, let me tell you that.
Well, why didn't you tell me what the agreement is, because instead of preaching?
I am just about to tell you what the agreement is. We've got at the moment, there's a set of guidelines in the industry that performers are very unhappy with because they aren't honoured, and many films pick and choose from it but don't actually fully comply. And that was part of the issue of wanting to bargain directly with producers to get binding agreements that would be offered. What we've had from Sparta is a proposal that they will now discuss both the content and the form of the terms and conditions set standards in the industry.
Yeah,
so it's not just the same form as previously, the guidelines that may or may not be honoured. They have offered to look at things like a process to ensure they're honoured.
Excuse me, Helen, the impression I've got is that Peter Jackson actually called you clueless and told you to go home. This doesn't sound to me like you've got any great breakthrough in agreement. You wanted to say something, John Barnett?
Yes, I wanted to say that for 4 years, Sparta have been trying to meet with MEAA to discuss exactly what is going to be done in the next few months.
Helen, with due respect...
Helen, you've had a go. Just a moment, please.
Helen, with due respect, you've been involved in this for a month. I've had 35 years at it. I know when you got involved because I spoke to a senior Labor union person and he asked me if I would speak to you and bring you up to date. So for 4 years, I can tell you, since they targeted Outrageous Fortune as an individual production and subsequently The Cult and subsequently This Is Not My Life, the producers' organisation, Sparta, have tried to sit down with MEAA and discuss what it is that we should do going forward. They have refused to come to any meeting.
If I can answer that, firstly, that what Sparta has said is they want to continue with the guidelines approach, which the actors have said doesn't work. You yourself don't comply with the guidelines.
Please tell me where.
In a complete sense. I've seen some of your contracts, and there are things missing, like some of the turnaround clauses and the overtime clauses and things like that. So there isn't a compliance in the industry with the Pink Book. And so what the actors want is more certainty, perfectly legitimate for working people in this country to seek to have agreements in which they have input. And let's go back
to the strategy. Really, let's go back to the strategy here, because a boycott, it was suggested, you know, this MEAA went round the world to the United States, to the UK, and tried to get actors tied into a boycott of this particular project. Now, that strategically was a disaster, wasn't it? Don't you accept that, Helen Kelly? It was
what actually happened was
a disaster.
The studio issued contracts, and the international union said, don't sign, we want to negotiate those contracts. and wrote to the studio and said, we want to negotiate the contracts. We don't want people to sign the ones that you've unilaterally issued. And that is actually a very legitimate thing to do. The real point here is, Paul, is that this dispute...
Now, hang on, let me just get John Barnett to answer that. John Barnett wants to... just a moment, please. John Barnett wants to answer that.
The studio did not issue the contracts, and also the union did not attempt to talk to anybody about this until the last month. They went around the world, they lined up all this opposition, which, by the way, I understand that the British Equity have not yet withdrawn, nor indeed has the Australian MEAA.
Very important. Can I just stop you right there? That's according to an email you've received last night from Peter Jackson.
That's right.
The British Actors Equity have not lifted the boycott.
That's right.
And neither has the MEAA.
MEAA has not issued a statement saying that the don't work rule...
How many actors in New Zealand are members of this Actors Equity?
Well, in the 2008-9 year, there were 85. In the year ended 2010, there were apparently another 50.
And this may bring the New Zealand film...
Over 600.
Helen, that is not right.
Over 600.
That is not right. The numbers are released.
The
numbers are released in the Australian MEAA. They didn't release here because they failed to return their annual registration. They got struck off. But if you go to the MEAA Australia, you'll find the numbers of the New Zealand members. And it isn't
over
600.
Either way, Helen, what we've got is a situation where $670 million of new money coming into this country when we're on our knees is in jeopardy because of the threat to boycott it by a small group of Actors Equity.
Because workers wanted to negotiate their terms and conditions. And, Paul, this is what happens when workers try to negotiate. Firstly, the employer says they don't represent anybody. This happens across New Zealand. Secondly, they say, well, offshore, we'll shut down, we'll close down if you try to bargain. Thirdly, they say you're doing something unlawful. We can't meet you.
No, they do not say this necessarily. It's the way you do things. It's the way things get done, Helen. If you come to a crowd a month before filming is starting and say we're going to bloody boycott you, then of course there's going to be trouble.
Can I just say that these workers, Helen, are negotiating about contracts for $5,000 a week. Each of these workers has an agent who represents them. Each of them is able to deduct all their expenses. Each of them operates as an individual contractor. We're not talking about bus drivers. We're not talking about distribution workers. We're not talking about nurse or police or teachers. We're talking about $5,000. No, not average wage. We're talking about the contracts for the Hobbit.
Can I just ask you something, John?
What is the average
Hang on,
wage?
Helen, just a minute. I'll put in a word for the actors here because, you see, the impression we really got just a couple of weeks back or a few weeks back is that people like Robin Malcolm, Jennifer Ward-Leland, these are nice people. They don't want to wreck their own industry, as Robin Malcolm says so colourfully this morning. They simply wanted to sit down and talk with Peter Jackson. Did that happen?
It didn't happen because... because first of all, the MEAA had gone around the world, lined up the international opposition, and then targeted 3foot7, the production company. Yeah. Sparta had said, negotiate with us. Jackson had said, negotiate with Sparta, and they refused to do that. Peter said, I am not in a position to negotiate with you because under New Zealand law, we cannot enter into a collective bargaining agreement. The words of the international boycott were that the producer has to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the Media and Arts Alliance for production in New Zealand, providing for satisfactory terms and conditions.
And we can't do it here.
You can't do it.
You can't do it, Helen.
We can do it here. We can do it here. And what we wanted to do was to get together and talk about how we could do it here. These actors were looking for standard terms and conditions. How do you think things like taxi companies offer every taxi driver a standard contract? How do you think all of our franchises in New Zealand offer standard contracts? Most of the producers offer standard contracts, and
but
then
Helen,
they'll negotiate.
For 3 years, Guillermo del Toro sat in Wellington. This is not something that's new. This did not happen last week. You've had 3.5 years to think about this.
Well, Helen's had a month. You've had a month. You see, I think the impression people have, Helen, is that you're well out of your depth. When Jackson calls you clueless and tells you to go home, this is a New Zealand-produced genius, the like of which we'll never see again, who has produced an amazing, who has brought Hollywood productions to this country. You know,
he is a
what do you know about show business? What do you know about the
director.
film industry? What do you know about international studios? What do you know about international actors' unions?
I got involved in this dispute, and within a week we had a process for settlement, and it's now fully resolved. That's what I know. Within 2 weeks we had fully resolved the dispute.
It's not resolved
until
the
Helen,
according to I've seen John's emails this morning from Peter Jackson last night. He's convinced
I'll
that
send
British
you mine
actors...
from Peter Jackson, Paul.
British
on the
Actors Equity has not
October,
lifted... British Actors Equity has not lifted the blacklist, nor has the NEAA. That's hardly resolved.
Not true.
That's hardly resolved.
That's not true. That's not true. On the 4th of October, Peter Jackson wrote to me and said he was going to contact Sparta and encourage them to be very open-minded, take a meeting, listening to the actors' concerns. Such an open discussion is long overdue, and I'm sure progress can be made to addressing their concerns.
20 days
later,
Helen.
On the 4th of October, I got that advice and followed it, and by the 13th we had a settlement. Nothing in that email suggests that was not going to resolve the dispute.
There has been no impression garnered by anybody this week that this thing is settled. In fact, Warner Brothers are flying out here, and by Monday or Tuesday we might have lost the whole damn $670 million and the New Zealand film industry.
It's interesting that the release from Jackson about Warner Brothers coming out to discuss shifting the movie, if you'd heard the interview with Fran Walsh on Catherine Ryan, she actually agreed that that wasn't what Warner Brothers had said they were coming out to. I hope the movie stays here, but that doesn't mean that working people shouldn't be able to negotiate their terms and conditions.
Can I suggest to you, Helen, that most New Zealanders this week are disgusted by Actors Equity this week and by the union movement this week, and they feel the actors have damaged the country.
Well, sometimes unions do things that are not popular,
Paul,
but
can
what
I
we
say
did here was
something
very
there,
legitimate and could have been headed off.
Hang on, John. Hang on. Yep, Helen.
It could have been headed off simply by respecting a union's request to negotiate. That's the crux of this. I don't know why on Wednesday those technicians marched and raised this thing all up again when Jackson knew that we had a settlement encouraged by him.
No, but that is a very important thing. When a gentle giant of a man like Sir Richard Taylor and his people go into the street, you've got something happening that's very unpleasant. Final word to you.
Can I say, Helen, that I think that you've really let down the actors. It is not fair at all for Robin Malcolm and Jennifer Ward-Leyland to be in the front line of this. They both have very strong opinions about it. They're both entitled to do it. They should not be the people who are having to have this fight with the unions and the production. And what it is a reflection of the ineptitude of the MEAA. You can't put Simon Whipp up. He's clearly Australian. You can't put Frances Walsh up. She's just of no account whatsoever, and you have no credibility in this role. So what you do is you put up two actors, both of whom are damaged goods, and that's really not fair to them. They're both terrific people.
Actually,
you
my
know
involvement...
They will find it hard to get work, not because people won't employ them, but because the public has a completely different perception.
Now, Helen, I've got to wrap this up, but where are we at with The Hobbit at the moment? Do you know? With the
well, all I know is that Warners are coming and a decision will be made then. I don't know that it's confirmed that it will take
What was
place.
the tone of Sir Peter's email to you last night? Was he optimistic? Is he...
Fearful.
Fearful?
Yep.
Great stuff. Helen Kelly, thank you very much, and John Barnett, thank you very much for coming in.